This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode, I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 331 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast, which is all about working with animals in tourism. Firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, where I'm recording this podcast episode today on a delightfully sea breezy, sunny summer afternoon here in Perth. So back to animals in tourism. You know, if you've been a regular listener, that I've definitely become, increasingly passionate over the years about encouraging travellers to think a bit more about how they interact with animals and wildlife when they travel. And mostly because I've been constantly learning more and more from people who work in that industry. So this episode is basically, it's a combo of conversations from three different people who work in this intersection of animals and tourism. They work in they work in this area in three different ways. And I hope you'll find these stories that they have to share as fascinating and also as educational as I did. So my first guest today is Nora Livingstone. Nora is co-founder of Animal Experience International, which is a Canadian organisation, and they coordinate ethical volunteer placements for travellers in various animal and wildlife centres around the world. And part of her job, essentially, is to travel around and check out some of these potential places where they will send volunteers to. And this story that Nora had to tell me is an example of her work visiting Sierra Leone.
Yeah, Sierra Leone was an amazing country that I was able to visit probably about 10 years ago. And it was the Sierra Leone Animal Welfare Society that asked me to come along and see if we could send volunteers there. And what they do is primarily dog, spay, neuter, rescue, and vaccinate, of course. And when I was there, it was so incredible because the work that they were doing was a mixture of dog therapy, getting dogs off the street and having them be put into homes so people could have like a therapy dog and just a buddy with them. And then there was some community dogs that are unhoused that are very happy to stay outside, but they need to be spayed and neutered. The only sustainable way to get dog populations down is the humane way, which is spay and neutering them. And Sierra Leone is such a beautiful country. The chocolate bar Bounty used to have a commercial that they filmed in Sierra Leone. That magical, like squeaky sound, white beach, tropical beautifulness is Sierra Leone.
I know it. Okay. I never knew that little fact. That's very interesting.
Yeah. Everyone has seen a picture of Sierra Leone beaches. And yeah, like it's as beautiful as its people. Like it's a group of veterinarians and techs, vet techs and vet nurses who are every single day hearing about a dog that is hurt, that they go out to a beach and bring the dog in, fix it up, release it so it's back with its pals. Every day are doing free spays and neuters for people that are bringing animals in. There were some monkeys that had come in that got hurt. There was a goat that had ingested plastic, as they do.
Silly goat.
Yeah. And just, the dedication of people in Sierra Leone was so amazing to see and so inspiring because there's many different things that are happening in every single country. And I think oftentimes people go, oh, you went to Sierra Leone as an example. You went there to help dogs. Don't people need help? But love and help is not finite. There are people who are doing amazing work against deforestation in that region. There's people that are doing amazing work with humanitarian rights and reconciliation in the region. There's amazing people doing animal stuff. I don't think that once we fix all the human things, then we can go to animal things.
Yeah.
I think we can do all the things at the same time, and whatever lights us up, whatever makes us excited and makes us, glow is what we should be doing. And I think that liberation is not a one-way street. If we are helping animals, then people in the communities that we're working with see that there's people helping animals and they go, oh, I can help animals too. This is something that I've seen in Nepal and in Mexico and in Kenya, where we have dog programs in all those countries, that the first time I visited, more than 10 years ago, and then I visit again years after that, I can see, and there's self-reporting, that animal welfare is going up because we're showing the local community there are locals that are helping these animals. And if your life is thinking that there's no way to help an injured dog, you're not going to see an injured dog because it will be too hard for your heart. You will not be able to do anything about it, and you will have to ignore it. That is just how your nervous system works. And if you show people this is the way to help dogs, they'll go, oh, I see an injured dog. I know how to help. I can actually do something. This happens often with wildlife as well. Even in Canada, if you see a bird at the side of the road that has hit a car, or you see a sad raccoon or something like that, people will just kind of ignore it and say, oh, well, it's nature's way. That is sad. But if you show them that there's a wildlife rehabilitation center in the area, we can see like a straight line in people knowing about it and wanting to help these animals. And so it's incredible, from Sierra Leone to Canada to Nepal, being able to see a real community effort to help everyone in the community, humans, human animals and non-human animals.
Nora saying love and help is not finite. I think that's such an important thing to remember. I imagine there are all kinds of connected societal benefits when people see animals and wildlife also being taken care of. So we can help, we can try to help all kinds of parts of our world, I guess, is my lesson there. Now, my next guest today is John Roberts. John is the Group Director of Sustainability and Conservation for the Minor Hotels Group, and he oversees lots of different and very interesting animal-related projects. You're going to hear more about some others in future episodes, but today this story is about the hornbills at Avani Resort in Koh Lanta in Thailand. Now, if you're not immediately sure what hornbills are, the best way I can describe them, I did have to Google to check, is that they're essentially toucans of the toucans of Asia and Africa, kind of those almost cartoonish big beaks. So this story is about a couple of hornbills and their habitat.
For the hornbills, they're our Avani on Koh Lanta. They've actually had a pair of hornbills called Gok and Gek who've lived there, forever. Hornbills mate for life, and they're a couple, and they hang around the place and have delighted everybody. And but they've never managed to raise a chick due to quite often predation and everything else. So basically, what we're turning around to do now is, first of all, just try and stop the predators, the monitor lizards, getting to their nest, but also trying to redevelop or develop even more the habitat. So we're planting trees and everything else, but also then bringing a level of guest awareness. So to be honest, as I say, they've been there for quite a while, but we didn't tell conservation stories quite so much around them. So what we're developing there at the moment is something that uses them as ambassadors, but allows guests to learn more about their conservation status, and how they help the environment as seed dispersers and everything else. So
that's really good. So what kind of stuff do you do to increase the guest awareness?
Well, the plan is to have them. It's mainly based around the kids, and to have a nature trail, if you like, where they can travel from place to place and they can do a certain activity. It doesn't have to be directly related to the hornbills, but you can learn about hornbill food and figs and fig trees and how figs work, and that becomes hornbill food. You can, learn that they pair for life. It's basically kids' activities, and you get a little stamp in your passport to say that you've done this. And every time, even if it isn't directly related to the birds, then they learn something first about conservation and tied it back to the birds. And then the longer goal, we don't want to be supplementary feeding and putting it and doing that. So they try and avoid the idea of the hornbills coming to one place at one time. But the longer term goal is to grow more trees that they like fruits or attract the insects that they like to eat, and then also maybe attract more into the area.
Mm-hmm.
They are territorial when it comes to nesting, but they don't mind feeding together and everything else to try and build the population on the island.
Yeah.
And then work with the National Park Department. And this is quite new, so we don't necessarily have permission for this yet, but to try and expand, there's a national park quite close by, and we can try and expand that territory. And the thing with hornbills is they're a great seed distributor. Lots of birds are, but hornbills are pretty good because they can eat such large fruit.
Right. Okay.
And so if you start planting trees that they like, they will
disperse them all around.
They disperse it and expand. They quicker at expanding the habitat than we could be planting trees, and in a more natural fashion. So you end up with rather than all the same species or the wrong species in the wrong place. Of course, if they drop the seed in the wrong place, it dies. So it's
right. Yep. Clever.
Trying to pin. I mean, as I say, they've been kind of a fixture and a beloved couple in the resort for the several years that we've been managing it, but just trying to actually harness that to not only teach about conservation, but then also to try and expand the natural habitat and the population on the island for the hornbills as well. So it's
I love that kind of project. And I did read somewhere in the info, like the idea that, luxury resorts are useful for conservation. Because I kind of had this thought, that luxury resorts mean more consumption and this is not good. This doesn't seem like the best way, but the fact that more money comes in means that it was like, the margins are higher and we can afford to then, work on these projects, etc., which was like a real light bulb moment for me, I have to say, to think, yeah. And so as you describe, trying to work with national parks and stuff, obviously you have a workforce that has enough time, has someone's job is to look at these things because there's enough money, there's enough margin in the business to be able to do those good giving back kind of things as well.
Yeah, and also to a certain extent, and it doesn't always work out. It depends how you manage it. One of the things, or I guess two things that I always say in favor of the luxury side of resorts is people are, one of the things, again, if you manage in certain resorts and the ones if you manage it this way, people are paying for space and privacy, which gives more room for habitat.
Yeah, true.
You've got to measure it, I guess, a little bit away from, you've got to try and work out that people are a little bit desensitized to lizards in places and make sure that they learn about the lizard.
Yeah, that's fair.
We work with the Four Seasons on Koh Samui, and they have a thing in the room that just explains this is the lizard. It's harm. And of course, some people are terrified, so you can't do anything against genuine fear. But if you put an explainer in place and give it a name, this is so-and-so the lizard, the tokay gecko, whatever, you may see him, he may go tokay in the middle of the night, but don't worry, it's exactly natural, he won't do anything to harm you. And in fact, he's keeping the mosquitoes down. And you can do things around that. That's one thing that I always look at, and particularly if you're going on safari or something like along those lines. But even in well managed, if you're working if you have a policy in place for your landscaping has to be native, so it's low water usage, whatever. You're not having to spray pesticides all the time. Then actually you end up with more habitat to play with, so you can actually do small scale. And obviously you don't want, you do if you're me, but you tigers or rhinos or whatever roaming the place.
Yeah.
But you have that luxury, and yeah, it is generally a larger team. So if you can talk about, as you said earlier, if you can get the team involved, then the team do have the space and the time to go and do these things. I'm not an advocate. I'm not saying that everything else is bad as well. That does happen on the shack on the beach model or whatever as well. It's not they're not mutually exclusive, the idea of luxury high-end tourism and conservation. But also you end up, if you have a cause and if you can show it and if you have a separate foundation, that's one of the things I'm key on, not just giving extra money to a hotel to do things. Get a foundation so you can ask for the accounts if you want to. You also have guests who have the high net worth to be able to say, well, that's a really good cause.
Right.
We're going to donate extra money to that. And again, in the case of Minor in Thailand, we will then match that. And then I guess the other argument that I have when it goes actually to community side of things, but also goes to conservation, is yes, you have the larger team member, but they also tend to be paid more, which goes back into the local community a little bit as well. So
yes, of course.
Yeah, it's not we're not always the demons.
Indeed, hotel chains are not always the demons. I know that you probably realise I rarely choose to stay in those kind of hotels, but it was really interesting to hear the argument for good that they're able to do as well. So I think with the right people in the right places, any kind of organisation can do good. So that was quite encouraging. Now, my final guest today is Suzanne Milthorpe from World Animal Protection in Australia. And she described an assessment visit that she took with World Animal Protection to a tourist venue in Bali. It was a return visit to let's call it a so-called turtle rescue venue, but perhaps that's not a good way to describe it. If you are particularly empathetic to animal suffering, you might find this bit a little confronting, just a warning.
One of the places we went to visit in Bali was a frankly horrible turtle venue that said it was a turtle rescue venue. And we knew going in that it was going to be terrible, and it was as terrible as we thought it was, big endangered turtles crushed in little sea pens. And at one stage, the lady who was showing us around sort of just dropped an endangered loggerhead turtle in my hand. So I just had to hold it because otherwise it was going to crash to the ground. But it was a very horrible situation because it was clearly distressed. But out the back, they also had a little mini zoo. And that's something you see a lot of in Bali, these little mini zoos where they have an owl and a sea eagle and usually a monkey, and they had a really cranky mongoose that was just very unhappy to be there. But the thing that really stood out of this generally awful situation was the monkey that was there was a monkey that we'd actually seen in 2017 when we did our first assessment. So this little macaque named Johnny, and he was actually he was a cover model, as it were, for the report we did in 2017 was a picture of him and another macaque named Jenny, chains around their neck, sat there for tourist selfies. And when we went back in 2023, Jenny had gone. They said she'd been released into the forest, but we have a big question mark over that. But so Johnny was alone in this little dirty cage. Macaques are social creatures like all monkeys, like we are. We're essentially social monkeys as well. And so he was there alone. He was running backwards and forwards in distress. He was biting his hands and then occasionally just sitting still and sort of staring. And then he'd go back to biting his hands and being, clearly upset. And I think the reason that stuck with me out of a lot of the places that we went was the fact that he was there 5 years later. Yeah. And in worse condition than ever, and more stressed and more distressed than ever. And it really brought home that, we see animals and it's often a once in a lifetime opportunity. When tourists go and see a wild animal, it can feel like that once in a lifetime opportunity. And often it is really driven by that love for animals and really wanting to be close to them and get to know them better and feel that sense of connection. But what happens when we go home, or what happens if, as the industry shifts to more and more responsible modes of travel and moves away from captive wildlife tourism entertainment, is there's just a number of animals who are there, who are stuck in this space, who probably can never be released into the wild because they've experienced this lifetime of trauma and distress and never learned how to be in the wild. And if we're talking about dolphins, they could be in captivity for 50 years. Talking about orangutans, it could be 70. We're talking about elephants. It could, be, for all of them, it's many, many decades of, this lifetime of misery and stress and trauma and poor living conditions. And so I think that's why Johnny really stuck with me, was because the impact is not just on the animal now, it's on the animal for many, many decades. And the more that travelers keep supporting this industry, the more animals will be brought in. And even if the industry shifts, at some point along the line, there's going to be this entire cadre of living, thinking, breathing, sad, upset, stressed, traumatized little creatures or big creatures who are going to be stuck as a hangover from an outdated form of travel. Mm-hmm. And so that really brought home to me the importance of shifting to this responsible travel model as soon as possible.
Oh, that's so sad, though, to have gone back after 5 years found Johnny's still there. Oh.
Yeah, it's a horrible story.
But important.
Yeah, it's really important to talk about that reality. And there is ways that we can transition animals out of out of the captive tourism industry. There's great sanctuaries. There are places that animals can go if they're not too traumatized, if they're not too distressed. And there were a couple of animals that we either saw or heard about in Bali where, to be honest, we thought they may not even be able to be taken to a sanctuary,
Right.
that there weren't very many options for them outside of where they currently were. But sanctuaries, genuine sanctuaries are definitely an option. And so that's something we do recommend for travelers in those countries where genuine sanctuaries are, where animals are either being rescued or rehabilitated, or they're being rehabilitated from the travel industry, the tourism industry. They're part of the solution. Those are great places to go because there might be ways that you can get closer to those wild animals than you would get to an animal in the wild because they're already, trained into that. That's, the damage has already been done. So you're not adding damage or, I guess, supporting damage of new animals being bred into or brought in for the wild for tourism. But also it is part of the model of shifting the tourism industry. So in those places where you can't see animals in the wild, they are a really good second option.
Lots of food for thought there from Suzanne, and some good tips on really stopping to think, I think, about how we approach an animal experience when we travel. So, thank you so much for listening to episode 331 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. I hope this helps you, and it certainly helps me to continue thinking about this aspect of animal tourism and hearing about how others are working in that industry. Just gives me a lot more ways to think about it and plan my trips because, of course, we all want what is best for the animals of our planet. So, big thanks to my guests. First of all, I chatted with Nora Livingstone from Animal Experience International, and you can find out more about them at animalexperienceinternational.com. I then chatted with the lovely John Roberts of Minor Hotels, more on them at minorhotels.com. And finally, from Suzanne Milthorpe, who is Head of Campaigns at World Animal Protection Australia, and more about them at worldanimalprotection.org.au. As always, come and chat with us about these topics in our groups. You can find either the Facebook group or LinkedIn group for Thoughtful Travellers. Just search for Thoughtful Travellers in those platforms or check out the links in the show notes. And do remember to sign up for the Thoughtful Travellers newsletter at Substack. Just go to thoughtfultravel.substack.com. These links and everything else you need to know for this episode will be in the show notes at notaballerina.com/331. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.